Good afternoon, everyone out there in Irish Breakdown land. I am Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. That guy right there, that's Brian Driscoll. He's the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. It is officially game week. We're fired up. It's Monday of game week. It feels like this game is like right around the corner finally, which is a great feeling because we've talked about it a lot. We're going to talk about it even more, obviously, today, tomorrow, and the rest of the week.
We're going to really get into some nitty-gritty the next couple days.
Man, I'm excited for the game. I'm excited to see some football. I'm excited for everything that comes with it. I mean, it's a bowl game. It's the Fiesta Bowl. I'm fired up. Very excited. But before we jump into the matchup that we're going to talk about today, Brian, we talk all the time about how the Irish Breakdown family is so important to us. And those aren't just words. That's reality for us. Right. And so I know that there's somebody out there that's hurting right now, and we want to throw it up there.
Well, you know, I've already prayed a lot about this, and I'm going to ask those of you that believe in the power of prayer as I do and as Vince does to keep Maggie Summers and Brian Summers in your prayers. Maggie is the mom of one of our very loyal members of our crew here, and she is dealing with she's battling lung cancer right now. She's already fought it once and kicked its butt, and it's back for round 2, and you know she's ready to kick its butt again. So she just started I believe chemo recently, and it's a battle, but it's tough, right? And so you know, we're going to be praying for Maggie. Brian is a big Notre Dame fan. They live near my old stomping grounds of, you know, when I was at Muhlenberg, Vince. So just want to keep Jacob and then Maggie and Brian in our prayers. And there's a lot of people out there thinking about you, a lot of people out there praying for you. And just battle, right? Just battle. That's all you can do. Just battle. So Maggie, we're definitely thinking about you. We love you. We're praying for you. And Irish Breakdown Nation's got your back. There's no doubt about it.
Absolutely. We want to make sure we brought that up because, again, it's not just talk. This is how we feel. This is how we operate. This is how our lives go. Yeah. And somebody asked us the other day, you know, who are the guys behind the curtain? You know, this is it right here. Like we, you know, prayer warriors and all that. So just wanted to make sure we got that out there, and, you know, we definitely prayers. No question about that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, there's no good way to transition from that to football, but we're going to give it a shot.
Now let's give them a fun. They watch our show. Let's give them a fun show let's give them some excitement about this bowl game to match up.
Absolutely.
To, because this is the matchup, Vince, that to me ultimately is going to determine the outcome of this game for Notre Dame.
There's no question.
How does Notre Dame's offense stack up against what is the best part of the Oklahoma State football team, which this year's, I can't even believe I'm saying this, Oklahoma State has one of the best defenses in college football. I can't believe those words are coming out of my mouth.
And they may never come out again, but for now.
But they absolutely do. Their defense is really, really good. Really good.
Yes, this is going to potentially be one of the best defenses Notre Dame has faced all season, right? I mean,
I would argue that they are.
From a number standpoint, they are the best.
Well, they're very close. Like, you know, Cincinnati, I think, and Wisconsin both had a slightly better score, you know, points per game average, and I believe Cincinnati or Oklahoma State was better than Cincinnati in like yards per game, stuff like that. I believe that Wisconsin, I'm looking now, I believe Wisconsin might have been slightly better in total defense. Wisconsin was number 1 in total defense. But the thing I always point to is Oklahoma State's playing Big 12 teams every week, and Wisconsin's playing Big 10 West teams every week. And so to me, I think this is going to be the best defense they've played this season. And then, of course, they had a game against Notre Dame where basically Notre Dame's offense wasn't on the field for the entire fourth quarter because they had a kick return for a touchdown and 2 pick sixes.
It was a pick six.
So
pick
to
six
me,
party. Yeah.
it's the best defense they've played. Now Cincinnati is better in spots, But overall, I think this is good. I think Cincinnati Wisconsin's the best ranked defense Notre Dame has faced. Cincinnati, to me, was the best defense they actually had faced in practical nature and from a matchup standpoint. And this team, to me, Arizona or Oklahoma State's at least as good as Cincinnati. I think a case could be made that they're better, and they match up better because their entire front is disruptive, where Cincinnati really only had one guy that was disruptive. Where Cincinnati was better is on the perimeter. Exactly. Oklahoma State's better in the boxes.
That's the glaring difference for me between Cincinnati and Oklahoma State. It's the perimeter. It's the corner play. I think that's going to be the best corners that Notre Dame will have faced all season, no question about it. But the box, I think, is better with Oklahoma State, and that's going to be the telltale sign, because if you're looking for the weakest part of Notre Dame, it's probably the offensive line, and so that matchup makes things very, very interesting.
And it definitely was the first half of the season. And here's an article I wrote yesterday, and this is what we're going to find out is this game is going to tell us one of three things. And it really revolves around how much has the offense actually improved. Because if you go back and look, there was a 5-game stretch that began with Toledo and ended with Virginia Tech, where Notre Dame played 5 straight top 40 defenses. And they averaged about 24 points per game offensively in those games. And that included 32 points against Toledo in a comeback win, 32 points against Virginia Tech in a comeback win. And I'm talking the Notre Dame offense averaged 24 points per game, because I highly doubt any of us can anticipate them getting 2 pick sixes and a kick return for a touchdown against Oklahoma State.
And right?
When you look at the Wisconsin game, you don't say, well, Notre Dame offense scored 41 points. No, the Notre Dame offense scored 20. The Notre Dame defense. So we're talking about the offense, right? The matchup of the offense. And so when you look at that matchup, Vince, it's they were not successful. Well, then after that, they started a stretch where the best defense they played was Navy. Scoring defense they played was Navy, who ranked 82nd. Everybody else ranked in the hundreds. Well, then you look at, say, well, they improved second half of the season. Well, what was the one game in the first half of the season that the offense looked great? It was against Florida State, who has a bad defense. They ranked 70th in points per game. So it's like when they played bad defenses, whether it was early or late, they rolled.
Right.
When they played good defenses, they didn't. Now, we can talk about how much they improved, but the problem is when it comes to evaluating this, when you look for context, is there wasn't a game during the final 6 that you could say, yeah, but that team was pretty good on defense and they still looked good. All 6 of them stunk on defense.
Yeah, they did.
And the one team that had the best defense, Navy, gave Notre Dame the most problems early in the game. Notre Dame didn't really get rolling against Navy till the second quarter. And so you look at it and say, boy, this is going to be a test, because I would argue that this is the best defense they're going to face, especially, like you said, Vince, from a matchup standpoint, because this is the deepest defensive line they've played, the most disruptive defensive line.
Right.
This is, in my opinion, the best group of linebackers they've faced all year. I think Wisconsin's the only one that could challenge that. And the reason I'm going to say Oklahoma State is because the context of the Wisconsin game is Leo Chenal had missed the 2 previous games with COVID leading into the Notre Dame game. So you wonder, was he really on his game like he would have been after he got some starts under his belt, right? I think that's something to kind of factor into that as well. So just the context of when they played, because Wisconsin's got a pretty good group of inside linebackers in Jack Sanborn and Leo Chenal. Sure. But again, Leo was just coming back. So that was the thing that I pointed to as the best when they played them. Because Malcolm Rodriguez is as good as anybody they've played so far this year, just as far as being a college football player. I don't know what kind of pro he's going to turn out to be, but as a college football player, he's really, really good. Super instinctive, really productive. This is a really good defense. And so we're going to find out if Notre Dame has improved, just how much they've improved, and whether or not, this offensive line especially has improved. Because if you look at Jack Cohn's numbers the second half of the year, he was 70+% completion percentage, passer rating of like 168, which would rank him in the top 10 nationally. The offense averaged 37 points per game offensively in the final 6 games, actually 39 points overall. But when you take the 2 touchdowns from Georgia Tech away, they were down to like 37.7, I think is what it was. Over 7 yards per play. I mean, the numbers down the stretch were awesome. Now we got to find out just how much improvement they actually made. And to me, it's a big matchup too, Vince, because it's if they play well against Oklahoma State, which playing well against Oklahoma State could be like 27 to 30 points. You know, it doesn't mean scoring 45 against the. I mean, you score 30 points against this defense, you basically almost doubled their season average of points allowed, right? So we got to set the proper context for what success looks like against Oklahoma State. If you're able to do that, you know, get that 27 to 34 type of score, then you've had a great day. And then it comes down to, okay, now you start getting really excited about what this offense could be next year. Because like I said, this is and as far as I know, no one's sitting out. There's two guys from their defense, starting safety Tanner McAllister, and then one of their top, the Jernigan kid, Jaden Jernigan, that we brought up last week, the really undersized but really athletic D tackle. They've both put their name in the portal, but Oklahoma State still lists them on the 2 deep. So I don't know if it's they're in the portal, but they're still playing. I don't have a clue what's going on. So right now we're going to discuss it with the thought that they're still playing.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And that's the biggest thing, I think, for this game is the second half of the season versus this game. Because you're right. They didn't play anybody defensively. They didn't. And I get it. And the offense took strides. And there's things that you and I can point to just from watching the film as a football coach to say, okay, they've gotten better at this, and this. But they haven't been necessarily challenged by a defense yet either. So I see both sides of it. Like, I can see how they've improved. I can see how the play calling is different. I see how they're not leaning on the offensive line like they were the first half of the season when they shouldn't have been, and how they kind of updated that and they changed that in the second half and they got more explosive. Well, they were also going up against defenses that weren't that good. So there's a give and take, right?
There's no doubt they improved schematically and philosophically. Yes, the question is did they improve enough from an execution standpoint up front and on the outside?
Yes.
To be there. And how is Jack Cohn going to handle getting pressure? We haven't seen Jack Cohn really get pressured in a while.
Right.
That was the time when he struggled. So really every part of this team, and you're doing it without Kyron Williams.
Yes.
So that's going to be the
best pass blocker, from a skill position standpoint.
Well,
too.
I mean, caught over 40 passes. I mean,
absolutely.
There's a lot he can do.
Yep, no question about it. So, ready to jump into some of the numbers? We generally do.
I want to just bring that up real quick.
Very good. Jacob, thank you very much for the super chat. He says, thank you so much, Brian and Vince and the IB family. It's so kind of all of you, and I appreciate you all so much. Jacob, you didn't have to send us a super chat for that. No question that we're on your side on this, and anything we can do, every little bit that we can do, we will obviously do. So thank you very much for hanging in there with us.
Let's dive into this matchup, Vince, of those transitions are always challenging.
I know, right? But let's talk about the run game. Notre Dame's run offense versus Oklahoma State's run defense. On paper, this is a no-brainer. I mean, as you're looking at it, it's a no-brainer. I mean, look at those ranks there for Oklahoma State and what they've done against the run versus what Notre Dame has done against run defenses. Now, Notre Dame's numbers have progressively gotten better as the year has gone on. There's no question about that. But they're not in the same category right now as Oklahoma State defensively.
No, I mean, and not even in the same universe. I mean, the teams they have played aren't even in the same universe. I was going to say that,
but I didn't want to go that far. But
well, I mean, but it's true. I mean, look, we have to be willing to admit things that are true, right? I mean, we can't be pie in the sky and that kind of stuff. I mean, what's the one game of the final 6 where you would say the Notre Dame rushing offense wasn't dominant? Be Navy, right? They only ran for 150 yards, only went for 4.8 yards per carry, and then some of those yards came later in the game. They did not run the ball well in the first half. Well, Navy's the only top 50 run defense that Notre Dame played in the second half of the year, right? I mean, they played one good run defense, and they didn't play well. Now, that 150 was better than what they did in the first half of the year against teams that had good rush defenses, but Notre Dame didn't exactly play a juggernaut of a schedule down the stretch. I mean, you look at North Carolina, their rush defense down the stretch, they ranked 92nd. USC ranked 86th. Virginia ranked 123rd, and Stanford ranked 127th. So again, this is sort of the unknown about Notre Dame. And I'm not trying to poo-poo what Notre Dame did, but we have to be honest and say, I think there has to be at least a little bit of uncertainty about just how much Notre Dame has improved. And that's what this game is going to tell us. That's the intriguing part of this matchup. And the other reason I think it's good to point that out is because if Notre Dame does have success, it's going to be a clear sign that this thing is really rolling because they are this good.
Right.
And so, but even if you take Notre Dame at what they were in the second half of the year, and let's just say, hi, Vince, let's just say, hey, look, we're gonna take the numbers they had starting with the Virginia Tech game, and we're gonna say, hey, that's who Notre Dame is as a rush offense, okay? And we're gonna use that to evaluate who they are.
Sure.
This is still advantage Oklahoma State.
Right.
I mean, because Notre Dame would have a much better rush offense, but it wouldn't be as good as Oklahoma State's. I mean, like I said, Oklahoma State's ranks fifth in the country in rushing. If you project Notre Dame's rush offense from the Virginia Tech game on, it was about 203. That would rank Notre Dame somewhere around 25th nationally in rushing offense. Right. So that's still good. I mean, it's very good. If Notre Dame does that all year, they're probably undefeated. And we're talking about their matchup against,
Somebody
Michigan
else.
or Alabama or Georgia or something. Right.
Sure.
But even then, this is still advantage Oklahoma State.
Right.
Then you take Kyron Williams out of the equation and you think about how many times the second half of the year Kyron Williams did something with nothing there. It's going to be a little tougher in this game. And so this is a matchup, Vince, that is very concerning on paper because Notre Dame doesn't have to run for 200 yards to win this game. If they do run for 200 yards, barring it being like one long play, they will win this football game.
They are winning the game. Yeah, exactly.
Unless it's like a 12 overtime. But even then, after the second overtime, you can only get 3 yards per play. So, I mean, that dumb rule. But if they get, I mean, honestly, if they could just get to their season average, that's a win against Oklahoma State, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And that would bode very, very well for the Notre Dame offense, because the reality is Oklahoma State's only given up more than 140 yards rushing in a game once, and that was against Oklahoma. They've only given up over 4 yards per carry 3 times, and one was in a game that they won by 46. The other, you know what I mean? Like the other time was against Texas, and Texas has one of the best running backs in the country in Bijan Robinson. So they don't give up over 4 yards to carry a whole lot. And then the other time against Oklahoma, a lot of that had to do with the quarterback. And Notre Dame doesn't really have that in their base offense. And
I think this is a good question from Michael Johnson, because it adds context, right? Because Notre Dame isn't used to playing Big 12 teams. And we know the Big 12, they like to throw it all over the place, right? So this is a good question. So he says, question, how did Big 12 teams rank nationally, and how good are Big 12 teams at running the ball or being balanced? You're muted, Brian.
Oklahoma's made a living in recent years running the football. And so the Big 12 did not have great offenses this year, but they had good offenses. And to Michael's point, because this is a very good question, they basically played 4 games this year against teams that ranked in the top 40 or top 30 in rush offense, because Baylor ranked 16th. They played Baylor twice. And Baylor didn't score on them really either time. They won one game 21. Baylor scored 21 points against Oklahoma against Oklahoma State, despite Oklahoma State turning the ball over 5 times in that game. Right? Still only got 21 points. So Baylor ranked 16th. And they played Baylor twice. Okay, so that's 2 games. And I'm pulling up the numbers here. Baylor rushed for 107 yards the first time they played, and Baylor rushed for 62 yards the second time they played.
Yeesh.
And so they're pretty good. They played Texas, who ranked 27th. Texas averaged 199 yards per game this year, rushing. Oklahoma State held them to 138, so that's 61 below their season scoring average. And if you take out the Oklahoma State game, it's over that, because that would jump them over 200 yards per game. And then they played TCU, who ranked 29th in rushing, and TCU had 133 yards rushing, 4.2 per carry in a game that Oklahoma State won by 46. So they have played some good rushing teams. And then also, so that's a quarter of their games, or a third of their games almost, because they played the Big 12 title game. Almost a third of their games were against teams that ranked in the top 30 in rushing offense. So they were tested. They were definitely tested and held up pretty well. And against the teams that weren't great at running the ball, they dominated. So, Michael, that's a great question, a great way of looking at it. And then the other thing too is to say Baylor ranked 16th in rushing offense. And see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the teams that rank ahead of them are non-Power 5 teams. So they have the 7th best rushing offense from a Power 5 standpoint. And Oklahoma State held them to, try to do the math in my head, 169 yards in 2 games. They were 3.7 yards per carry the first game, and that 3.7 was inflated. Smith had like a think about like a 55-yard touchdown run in that game. You take that run away, they did nothing. He couldn't break one free in the rematch, and they only went for 62 yards, which is about what they would have been the first game without that 55-yard touchdown run. So yeah, they're pretty good. They're pretty good on the run defense. But I think, Mike, what I love about that question, Vince, is it shows how we want all of you to think, right? It shows you're thinking about the context of this. And that's Michael, that's exactly how we want you to look at this.
Yep.
And it just allowed for better discussion because we can now look at that and say, hey, look, here's where they ranked.
Mm-hmm.
So, but some of the performances they had were just kind of silly, just because of the way that they run the ball. So I think to Michael's point, there are some stats on there. You say, well, it's a little inflated because this team doesn't run it as much. But like Texas Tech has been a much better rushing team now than they used to be in the past. The Texas Tech used to rank in like 120s all the time in rushing. They were 75th this year. Well, Texas Tech averaged, I just deleted it accidentally, but Texas Tech rushed for, I'm trying to pull it up here. Texas Tech rushed for, they ranked 75th in the country. They rushed for 150.7 yards per game. You take out the game against Oklahoma State where they only rushed for 25 yards on 26 carries.
Yeah.
Then obviously their number goes up again. Now, here's the interesting thing. Part of this, and I'll just pull it up now and we're going to come back to the rushing matchup. Part of this is this number down here, right? I mean, there was 376 lost yards rushing because of sacks.
Good point. Yeah.
And so, you have to count that into it as well. And so I'm just going to quickly add this up together. So if you add what was it, Vince? 300 and what did I have there? 376. If you add the 376 yards to that, it changes it a little bit, but not a ton. It jumps it up to 120.1 yards per game.
It's still pretty good.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just looked at that number and ranked that number as where it would stack up nationally, 120.7 yards per game would rank them 20th in rush defense, better than Michigan's. Even if you took out all the sacks.
Sure.
Right? And you included sacks for all those other teams. That's the point of what we're saying here. And the thing I like about their defense too is Notre Dame, for example, had 40 sacks this year, and it was their best sack performance in over 20 years.
Right.
But at the end of the year, Notre Dame was in the 70s. I think it's like 78 tackles for loss. I mean, 38 run stops, like stops behind the line, like run tackles for loss. Oklahoma State had 54 sacks, which is a great season. They had 113 tackles for loss. That's 59 run stops behind the line of scrimmage. That's impactful. That's big time impacting the run game. That's, if my math is correct, I believe that's over 4 tackles for an average of 4 tackles per loss per game.
That's pretty good.
That's a really good stat.
Yeah.
Really, where Notre Dame's at like about 2, right? So almost double what Notre Dame is. So this is a really, really good rush defense. Now, is it a rush defense that Notre Dame can't have success against? No, it's not. I think Notre Dame can do some things to have some success in this game because I don't think the Big 12, one thing I'll say about the Big 12 this year, I don't think the Big 12 has necessarily a lot of great running backs this year. There's a couple that I really like. Breece Hall. I like Bijan Robinson. I like Abram Smith. Those are the guys I really like. Deuce Vaughn, I haven't seen a ton of. Hear a lot of good things. And but none of those guys are necessarily like Breece Hall's a great back. I don't know if Breece Hall's necessarily a make you miss kind of guy, right? Abram Smith is a back I like a lot. And he had 97 yards on 10 carries in the first game. But like I said, 50 of something of that was on a touchdown run. He went for 63 on 17 carries the next game. But you watch that Big 12 title game, Vince. He's a hammer. I mean, he's a hammer. That kid's an absolute hammer.
Exactly.
Deuce Vaughn, they just flat dominated. He had 22 carries on 13 yards. He's a little guy. I'd say the best back they played all year was Bijan Robinson, and he went for 135 yards on 21 carries, 6.4 per carry. Now, the other backs couldn't do anything, and the sacks took away from that big time. But if you look at that game, Vince, when you break down that game, that was a game where you could say, okay, that's probably the closest in style that Notre Dame's backs are of what they faced. I think Notre Dame's backs are more elusive than a Breece Hall. They're more elusive than an Abram Smith. That's going to be a factor. Can they force missed tackles where that's not really Breece Hall's game? You know,
Right.
He's more
exactly.
like a one cut, great vision kind of guy. And so to me, that's the thing I look at and say, okay, how does that factor into this? You know, have they played a back that really has the home run potential that Chris Tyree has? And then backs that have the size and make you miss ability that Logan Diggs and Audric Estime have. That's the question. I think I would argue that just top to bottom, this may be the best, most talented, let me rephrase, most talented backfield they face. Not the best, because none of these, I mean, Chris Tyree was banged up all year. Audric Estime played one game, carried the ball in one game, and Logan Diggs only barely had over 200 yards rushing. So I mean, can't say they're the best. But as far as just pure God-given ability, I would argue that this group stacks up against top to bottom. Now, none of the Notre Dame backs are as good as Bijan Robinson. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about but I'll take Notre Dame's 2 and 3 against other 2s and 3s. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me.
And so to me, that's going to be a test, right? So skill-wise, I like this matchup for Notre Dame, and we're going to have the same conversation we talked about the pass game. The question is, can the Notre Dame offensive line hold up front? That to me is going to be the biggest question of this game. And this is a big game for Jeff Quinn, because Jeff Quinn's not going to be back next year at Notre Dame. As of right now, Coach Quinn doesn't have a job. My understanding is he'd still like to coach. At first, I'd heard he was thinking about retiring. I think that's still an option. But he also interviewed, there was a report that he interviewed for the Nebraska job. So clearly he's thinking about it. If he wants to coach again, this is a big game, big opportunity for him. This is a big resume builder for him to go out there. And I think he'd like to end his career on a strong note.
Absolutely. Who wouldn't? Yeah.
And so I would imagine that Jeff Quinn's going to do the best he can to get this group ready to go. Hopefully it's good enough, because if the offensive line can't hold water, which means, what does that mean against this matchup, Vince? Assignment correct. Got to be assignment correct, because if you're not assignment correct, there's going to be TFLs all over the field, right? And then the other part is you got to play with some force. Now, if Tommy Rees is smart, and I believe that he is, he's in a situation where he's like, okay, I know what our offensive line coach is good at and what he's not good at. What he's not good at is getting push. Okay, so to say, how do I game plan into that? Misdirection, outside zones, and stuff like that, right? Perimeter runs. Okay, so that stuff would make a lot of sense. The outside zones, the buck sweeps, the counters, things like that. Okay. The issue, however, is that Oklahoma State has pretty good team speed on defense. So it's like, is there ways to game plan to take advantage of their speed, meaning get them moving, that you can create vertical cuts? But then does that allow them to chase and pursue? And then also those runs don't require you to be as physical up front. So I think we may see some stuff like that. And then what you're going to do, though, is if you're going to do that, you have to counter it with some backside RPOs. You have to counter that with some reverses, some play action passes, some things to kind of slow that speed down. That's where Tommy Rees is going to have to get real creative in this game. Is I don't think you can just run inside zone, but if you have some success running outside and with the misdirections and those type of things, then Vince, what I think that does is that gets Oklahoma State running this way, and all of a sudden, that's that one time you show something, and Chris Tyree hits that sucker and increases it vertically for a big play.
Yep.
So that's where Coach Rees is going to have to really make his money, is being creative with the run game and not just going 12 personnel and running it at them, which Baylor tried to do in the first game. That's something Baylor did, Vince, if you noticed. Remember, Baylor came out in like a lot of 12 personnel in the opener.
Right.
And just Oklahoma State just dominated them. The second game, they came out in the first half and they mixed up their personnel. They were going like empty. They were going 4 wide. They were really mixing up their personnel. And that's where they started having success. When they went trying to go back to the run game in the second half because they had a lead, they tried to sit on that lead. And it almost cost them the game.
Yep.
Because they could do nothing in the second half because they tried to go back to just pounding the ball. Coach Reese is going to have to do what we've said all year, which is reverse engineer his offense. Use your pass game to set up your run game. That's going to be a big part of this matchup.
And the biggest temptation is to look at these numbers right here, right over there. Yep, that way. To look at these numbers and be like, we got to throw the ball a bunch. That's going to be the temptation. And I'm not saying that that's what Coach Reese is thinking.
They do need to do that.
Oh, they absolutely do. But you still have to be somewhat balanced. Right. You still have to run the ball, and you still have to be effective running the ball in order to win this game. You can't just be, pass, pass, pass. Yeah, we'll throw a run in there. Pass, pass, pass. There's things that you can do. Now, of course, there are passes that are basically like extended runs and all that. We can get into that when we talk about the pass game. But you can't just look at this and be like, well, we can't run the ball. We got to do anything else, right? Mm-hmm. So you still have to be balanced, and you still have to be respect the run game for your offense, because if you don't have it, you're not going to be successful.
Right. They have to at least present a challenge with the run game.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't have to be a bunch of yards, but if they can get a few gash runs, like, hey, look, if you want to overplay this thing, we'll gash you. We may, you may have 3 or 4 negatives, but the next play, Chris Tyree's going for 40, or Logan Diggs is back cutting that sucker and he's taking it out the back door and he's going for 30. Those are the things you have to do, because if you can because what you don't want to do, to your point, Vince, is if you get too perimeter oriented, then with your pass game, then Baylor's just going to say, we're just going to take your pass away and we're going to pin our ears back and rush the quarterback. You have to try to keep them focused on the box as much as you can to then create the one-on-one isolations outside and over the middle that allow you to be successful. Because if their linebackers aren't worried about your run because their D-line is dominating, then what's going to happen is their linebackers can basically double team Michael Mayer all game,
right,
with the safeties. And you can't allow that to happen. So you have to keep them somewhat thinking about the box, which means your 5 has to block their 4. It has to. And you have to limit the tackles for loss. If you can limit the tackles for loss, especially early down tackles for loss, you're going to be in trouble. And then Notre Dame, 3rd and short is going to be a big part of this game. Oklahoma State has one of the best 3rd and short run defenses. I mean, you see their numbers. Their third down defense is number 2 in the country. Okay, and we'll get into this even more a little bit. But Baylor did this in both games. Baylor would get in these 3rd and 4th and short situations and go big boy football, and Oklahoma State just ate them up. Remember the 4th down call? They tried to – they didn't come close on that 4th down call in the 3rd quarter. They didn't come close. And that's what they do. So that's where you kind of got to be creative. Now, when Baylor did that earlier in the game, they threw the ball out of it and got some big plays. Their short yardage rush defense is really, really good. But you've got to get there to where you can have some opportunities to throw, because if you're getting yourself into 3rd and longs, I don't know what's better, their 3rd down pass rush or their 3rd short run defense.
Yeah,
it's both really good. So, but you want to be in a situation where in 3rd and long, you have one option: just throw the ball. And then, whereas at least in 3rd and short, you have the option of running and throwing, and that's where they can be vulnerable. And so that's why, Vince, like you said, they have to limit the mistakes, limit the TFLs, so that way you're getting yourself in a lot of 3rd and mediums and 3rd and shorts. If you can do that, then that's where Notre Dame's going to have a chance, because the more you can move the chains with the run, and the quick throws, the more opportunities there are for you to run more plays, which means a great opportunity to get that. You just got to break that one, right? Get that one big play. But if you're going 3 and out, 4 and out, 5 and out all the time, then you're lessening your odds for getting those chunk plays, because that's going to be a key. You're going to have to get some chunk plays in this game, and you hope that a couple of them come in the run game.
All right, Brian. So let's move to the pass game. We've kind of hinted around at some of the numbers and things like that for the pass game, but let's talk about this thing. Again, looking at the numbers straight off on paper, you go, Oklahoma State's going to have the advantage here, and rightfully so. They're a really good defense, and Notre Dame still had the first half of the season that they didn't do so hot. So But this is very interesting because, again, it goes to the offensive line and what they're going to allow Notre Dame to do. That sack number is like, to me, as I'm looking at these numbers, it feels like it's in bold and italic and underlined and everything else. Like 54 sacks in,
Mm-hmm.
12 games, 13 games, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
is a massive number. And they're number one in the country for a reason.
Here's the interesting part about this matchup, though. And this goes back to the question Michael asked earlier. Oklahoma State played 4 teams that ranked in the top 30 in rushing offense. They only played 2 that ranked in the top 30 in passing offense. And that's Iowa State and Oklahoma.
And they lost to Iowa
A
State.
team that beat them
Yeah.
and a team that almost beat them.
Right.
And that's the interesting thing about it, is because this is the thing, is their numbers. So like we always talk about, like, look, no, you have to take numbers in context, right? And the context of the rush defense is really good. The context of the pass defense it's a little misleading, in my opinion. And the reason I say that is because they don't play a lot of teams that are really good running the football or throwing the football. Baylor doesn't throw it at all. And you look at some of their statistics were a little skewed by some really huge games. They held Kansas to 44 passing yards. Well,
Jeez.
Kansas stinks.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Kansas is awful. And when you look at where Kansas ranked at the end of the year, let me find it here. Kansas ranked 106th in passing offense. Kansas State ranked 99th in passing offense. Well, neither of those teams passed the ball very well against them, right? I mean, that's kind of what makes sense. I think the game that surprised me the most was they held Texas Tech to under 100 yards passing.
Wow.
That was a weird game. Now, Texas Tech isn't the same air raid team they used to be, but that was a really good performance.
Sure.
But then there's other games where you look at it and you say, they weren't that great. Iowa State, for example, one of the 2 top 30 pass offenses they faced, passed for 307 yards, 27 of 33, 81.8% completions. That's a pretty good day for Brock Purdy. He was really good that day, and that kind of helped them be successful. 27 to 33, 81.8% completions, 307 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, 9.3 yards per attempt. That's a pretty good day.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good day for him. And so the other team that they played, like I said, that was a top 30 pass offense is Oklahoma. And they had a talented but a true freshman quarterback. And now Oklahoma, to me, by the end of the year, wasn't really rocking and rolling on offense. They weren't playing great down the stretch. But Caleb Williams still had pretty decent success that game. He went 20-39, not a great completion percentage, but he had 252 yards and 3 touchdowns. This comes a week after he went 8 of 18 against Iowa State and 8 for 87 yards. The game before that against Baylor, he went 9 of 18 for 142 yards, no touchdowns and 2 picks. So coming into that game, Caleb Williams had 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions. And so you look at it and say, okay, well, then he found some success. So the point being, if you can protect the quarterback, which is a huge, gigantic, as big as the screen, then this is the area where you can have some success against Oklahoma State. Because as I said, the numbers aren't exactly as impressive. And that's where this being a big year in the a weird year in the Big 12, it was really weird. There were 6 of the 10 Big 12 teams ranked 70th or lower in passing offense this year. That's not normally how it goes. 6 of the 10. So again, 6 of their 9 opponents, because remember, there's 10 Big 12 teams. They don't play themselves. Were teams that ranked. Then they also played Boise State, who ranked 39th. That was also a game they almost lost. Boise State went 22 of 35 for 62.9% completions, 242 yards and a touchdown, and they also had a pick. Boise almost beat Oklahoma State. They won 21-20. So that was another team that they played that had a pretty decent pass offense, right? That had some success against them. So when you really break down the numbers, Vince, they benefited, in my opinion, from playing teams that weren't really great at throwing the football.
Sure.
And another team, Tulsa. Tulsa's a pretty decent passing team. Tulsa ranks 51st averaged 251 yards a game. They went 19 of 27 for 224 yards. Again, that's Tulsa, and then Oklahoma State beat them 28-23. So I think their vulnerability, in my opinion, again, I'll go back to is this part of the game. If you're going to have success on them and move the ball on them, you're going to have success in the pass game. That means what, Vince? It means protecting your quarterback, number one. How do you do that?
Thing. Yeah.
Move the pocket, max pro, empty, half rolls, bootlegs, not nakeds, but bootlegs. So a bootleg is essentially when the quarterback play actions goes out and someone goes with him. An offensive lineman goes with him to protect. That's a bootleg. A naked is when you play action and run and he's by himself, right? That's where the naked comes from. So there is a difference between the naked and the bootleg. So those are going to be some things. Screen game is going to be important, but you also got to attack down the field. You got to attack over the middle. You have to attack over the intermediate zones. You have to take shots down the field. You have to be willing to attack every part of the field. And if you can do that and find ways to protect your quarterback, I think they can have some success here throwing the football. Because I like the matchup outside. I think Notre Dame's receivers should be able to have some success. Now, their corners are solid players, better than most of the corners they've played down the stretch, kind of compared to the North Carolina and USC corners, to be honest with you. Guys that Notre Dame's receivers had some success with. So I like their secondary, but their secondary players to me are excellent, as we talked about last week. Really good run defenders, where they can have some issues. And we saw this in the first half of the Baylor game, is they can get beat in the pass game. And that's where Notre Dame has to have success, in my opinion.
Well, and I think that this is the area where I think Notre Dame can have the most success is through the air, right? I mean, the part that of the Notre Dame offensive line that has consistently has gotten better over the year has been their pass blocking.
Right.
And I mean, look, we've said it all along that Jeff Quinn teaches pretty good pass blocking. I mean,
yeah, they sucked the first half of the year this year, though. I'll say that
they did, but they've gotten better.
Played no good pass rushers down the stretch. That's the other thing.
Agreed, but that's what they've done the best at.
Right.
And so that leads me to hope and believe that they could have some success here if Jack Cohn is given even a little bit of time. Because again, you do want to get the ball out quickly. You want to have your screens. You want to do all of that. But if they can hold up long enough for him to hit some shots down the field, that just opens up everything. And I think that they have the best opportunity to do that right here with this matchup. And now, again, on paper, I'm giving the advantage to Oklahoma State. But I think this is where Notre Dame can do the most damage.
Right.
So I have a lot of confidence in Notre Dame in this matchup. But I've got to go Oklahoma State just based on what I'm seeing here on paper in the advantage game. But again, I think it's a slim margin, and I wouldn't be upset if you went the other direction.
If you just go stats, it's Oklahoma State advantage. I'm actually going advantage Notre Dame because statistically, yes, on paper they have the advantage, but when I look at this game matchup wise, they don't have anybody that can cover Michael Mayer. They don't have, in my opinion, their outside receivers are good, but Kevin Austin should be able to have some success. They haven't faced a quarterback like Jack Cohn in a while, and I don't count Caleb Williams like Jack Cohn. What I mean like Jack Cohn, I'm not talking about better. Jack Cohn's the best quarterback. Like him, meaning how he plays. Accurate, get the ball out, make good decisions. Like, I don't know, a guy like Brock Purdy, for example. You know what I mean? That's the game. If I'm Tommy Rees, I'm watching a lot of that game. I'm watching some of the things that some of these teams that have had some success on the football did against them. Because I think personnel-wise, Notre Dame has the advantage. The question is, again, it comes down to, can you protect the quarterback? So I'm actually going to slightly go with Notre Dame in this advantage, in this matchup, because I think the personnel fits. I think there's some hungry players that have some things to prove. And I think that this is also where not having Jim Knowles is going to have the biggest impact, more so than the run game. Because this gets into, to me, I think for a defensive coordinator, the best part of strategy, the most challenging part of strategy is how you fit your coverages with everything else that you do. And I think that's going to be the interesting. And we had a question from Nick Paris, Vince. It says, are all of Oklahoma State's TFLs based on blitzing, assuming that opens up some passing lanes? No, it's not. And that kind of is what has made Oklahoma State so good. So if you look at Oklahoma State's tackles for loss, their number 1, 3, and 4 guys in tackles for loss are all defensive linemen. and they have a lot of production from their defensive linemen when it comes to statistics, sacks, right? So, 3 of their first 4 guys in sacks are defensive linemen. Their top 2, Colin Oliver, Brock Martin, 10.5 and 7 sacks, they're defensive linemen. They don't do a ton of unsound blitzing. And the thing that Jim Knowles does a great job of, Vince, you and I have talked about this, is he did a nice job of protecting when he did blitz. So he wasn't leaving those passing lanes open. But, Nick, that's kind of why I focus a lot on, if you can find ways formationally to generate some one-on-ones, that is where you're going to be able to have some success. Because what the Big 12 did not have a lot of this year is the Big 12, in my opinion, did not have a lot of teams that had great pass catchers. This was a little bit of a down year in the Big 12 when it came to dynamic pass catchers and dynamic quarterbacks and dynamic offenses like it has in the past. Now, that doesn't take away from what Oklahoma State did, because their numbers are phenomenal. And yes, they benefit to a degree, but so instead of being 5th in scoring or 7th in scoring, they'd be 12th in a normal Big 12 year, if that makes sense, meaning they're still really good. And so when I look at this team, I say there are some matchup problems that really nobody else was able to exploit against them. And that's what they're going to have to do is, like Charlie Kolar, for example, from Iowa State, is considered one of the best tight ends in the country. He had 6 catches for 69 yards. With all due respect to Charlie Kolar, he's not Michael Mayer. I don't care what the Mackey Award people say. He is not Michael Mayer. And so that's a matchup problem. But then you've got Kevin Austin. They've got to find ways to get Kevin Austin in pass game situations. They've got to find ways to get Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey on some vertical shots, because if they can hit a couple big plays down the field early, whether it be play actions or just, hey, you get cover 1 and you look that safety off to the left and you come back to the right on that one-on-one, that's where you can hit some big plays. That's how you soften up that defense to then make them say, now you open up some opportunities in the run game.
Sure.
And so that's what, in my opinion, they're gonna have to do. So I give slight advantage to Notre Dame just because of the matchup. Again, on paper, Vince, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
I just want to make that clear. You said very clearly, based on the numbers, we're going with Oklahoma State. That's totally fine. I'm choosing to go a different route, because if it's based on numbers, it's a no-brainer. It's Oklahoma State. I mean, there's one area where Notre Dame ranks higher. I'm going more with the matchup than I am with the numbers. And that's the one area where I think Notre Dame's success in the second half of the year is not misguided based on the opponents they've played, because I would argue that Notre Dame's numbers, because of how dominant they were down the stretch, their pass game numbers were a little bit suppressed, because Jack Cohn only had 174 yards against Virginia. That's because they stopped letting him throw. If they would have kept letting him play, he's got 250, 280 yards down the stretch.
Easily.
USC, 213 yards. Well, that was before the receiving core really started playing well. Kevin Austin had 2 huge drops in that game that would have got him over 250 yards. And so I think Jack Cohn's been playing at a really high level down the stretch. And if he can continue that, I don't think Oklahoma State can find answers for it for 60 minutes. And I think that's how Notre Dame's going to win the game, which then opens up some opportunities for the run game. So I just feel like the depth of weapons Notre Dame has is just not something that Oklahoma State's used to. Now, again, when I talk about these things, I'm talking about Notre Dame getting to 24 to 30 points, right? Like, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about Notre Dame scoring 40 plus. We're talking about just doing enough to win the game is what we're talking about. Because, could Notre Dame win 40 something to 14? I mean, bowl games are weird like that, Vince. I mean, like, if that were to happen, that would not be like somebody said, somebody said to me, I think it was on Twitter, I wrote an article, so Oklahoma State's defense isn't that good, and we're going to find out in the bowl game. And I'm like, no, we're really not going to find out in the bowl game, because just because Notre Dame goes – like, was Notre Dame's 2012 defense bad because of what Alabama did to them in the bowl game?
No.
Or was it just a bad game, right? That was still a great defense for 12 weeks, right?
Exactly.
And that's kind of how I feel about Oklahoma State. Could Notre Dame do that to them? Sure. Just like Oklahoma State could have that game of the year against Notre Dame's defense. We don't know. But this is a really, really good defense.
No doubt.
That if Notre Dame is able to get to 27, 30, 34, that's a great performance. And you look at like Oklahoma, we talked about this. Oklahoma scored 33 against them. Well, 9 of those points were by the Oklahoma defense. They had a safety and a defensive touchdown. So they really only scored 24 points, which gets back to not a single team that Oklahoma State played this year. Not a single team scored more than 24 points on offense against this football team. Oklahoma is the only team that scored more than 24, period. And as we said, 9 of those were by the Oklahoma defense. Not a single offense has scored more than 24 points on this team this year. So that's where if Notre Dame can get there and above, that's how Notre Dame has a chance to win this game. It's going to be tough to win a 20-16 game. That puts a lot of pressure on your defense. I think Notre Dame's defense is capable of it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But you want to have your offense give you a chance, because that's how a blowout could happen, Vince. A lot like the Wisconsin game. Notre Dame jumps on them 24-13 because of a kick return and a turnover. Wisconsin has to start throwing. They can't run. They can't be balanced anymore. And then Notre Dame's able to turn a couple turnovers and scores. If Notre Dame blows Oklahoma State out, I think it'll be something like that, where they just put some on early. Just like if Oklahoma State wins convincingly, it'll be because they put a couple on them late because of turnovers that are trying to come back. I think it's going to be a lower scoring game, but if Notre Dame's going to win, this is the matchup that I think is going to matter. And then we kind of transition into this. This is this right here, Vince. This is going to be it right here.
Yep.
These two categories. Notre Dame has been a really weird third down team this year. A very, very weird third down team. At times, they can be really impressive on third down, like really impressive. And at times, they're absolute garbage on third down. And my question is, which version of Notre Dame shows up? Is it the version that went for 63.6 against Virginia and over 50 against Navy and 67 against USC, 57 against Toledo, or is it the unit that had 18.2% converged third down success against Stanford? That's going to be a big part of it. And then when Notre Dame gets in the end zone or in the red zone, they got to get touchdowns.
Got to.
Because this is not the type of offense at Oklahoma State that they're a lot like Wisconsin, very different stylistically. I'm not comparing them stylistically to Wisconsin. What I'm referring to is this is not a team that wants to get behind 14, 17 points. Because with all due respect to Baylor, Notre Dame's not sitting on a lead like that in the second half, I don't think.
Not anymore.
And so I feel like Notre Dame's going to have learned their lesson from that and say, hey, look, we've got to put another one on the board. You don't got to score 3 more times, but Baylor just needed one more score to put that thing away. And I don't see Notre Dame handing them a third quarter, fourth down stop. Notre Dame will be smart enough to play the field position there. I thought that was a bad decision by Dave Aranda, but they've got to move the chains. Notre Dame's got to move the chains, and they've got to get touchdowns in the red zone. If you can do that, then you've got a chance. Because I'll say this, if it wasn't for Baylor forcing a bunch of turnovers, they not only lose the Big 12 title game, they lose convincingly.
Yeah.
Because they gave Oklahoma State every chance to stay in that game. If Oklahoma State doesn't turn the ball over a ton, again, think about it. They turned the ball over 5 times and still were within an inch away from scoring. Like that's nuts. I'm sorry, 4 times. They turned it over 4 times.
If that happens in this game and Oklahoma State turns the ball over 4 times, this is a blowout. I'm sorry. There's no way they're going to be able to overcome that many turnovers against this Notre Dame team.
Right. Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
But that's where the Notre Dame offense has to capitalize. So, and that's a great point too, Vince, that sudden change offense. When you get the ball after a turnover, if you're able to force turnover, you got to get 6. You got to put it in the end zone. Because you got to get Oklahoma State, you got to get them behind early. If Oklahoma State stays in this game, the longer this game goes on, with it being a competitive game, the more difficult it gets for Notre Dame, in my opinion. Because Oklahoma State, to me, has been a really good finishing team this year. They're a really good second-half team, in my opinion. They make good adjustments. I mean, it's like what we talked about last week, Vince. This is a really well-coached football team.
No question.
And I don't think Jim Knowles leaving just changes that. And Mike Gundy, in an interview this week, one of the press conferences, made a really good point. Starts going down his defensive coaching staff, and like one guy's been there 11 years, one guy's been there like 9. Like they got some guys that have been there for a while. They're going to be able, for at least this game, to
make it work.
Still be a pretty good defense.
Yeah, exactly.
Notre Dame's going to have to find some ways to create some big plays, and part of that's going to be making in-game adjustments, because there's going to be some differences that we see here that we didn't see on film because Jim Knowles isn't there. But we need to see Notre Dame make quick adjustments, because they've got to move the ball. They've got to move the chains early. got to move the chains early, got to protect the football. If you can do those things, and I think Notre Dame has a chance to really get rolling. Because if Notre Dame can get into a rhythm and avoid a lot of early 3-and-outs, if they can get into a rhythm and kind of get Oklahoma State on their heels, that's where I think Notre Dame will find some success. And that's where I think this game is going to be won. So these two stats down here, I mean, these numbers up here don't mean a whole lot to me. Notre Dame's got a pretty good scoring offense. I mean, they're 35.3 points per game, a little bit skewed because of 5 non-offensive touchdowns this year. But if you look at Notre Dame's scoring numbers in the last 6 games, I mean, they showed they can. And if you think about it too, some of those early games, they blew chances to get the ball. I mean, they should have scored, put 2 more on USC. If they wanted to, they could have put 3 more on Virginia in the second half.
No question.
So Notre Dame's scoring average, I think. So what I'm saying is that balances the fact that it would technically be lower if you didn't have the defensive touchdowns. If you took away the defensive and special teams touchdowns, Notre Dame's like 32 point something, like 32.5 or something like that. Well, that's countered to me by the fact that there was too many games, in my opinion, that they called off the dogs late, where they could have put points on the board late in the season. So they have an offense that can score some points. It's just can they get off to an early start? Because you've seen it. We see it a million times. It's when you get off to slow starts in the bowl game, it's hard to kind of get back into that rhythm because you've been off. You can be rusty, but if you can find a way to get rolling early, boy, that's how some of these games in the bowl games are like, wow, that game didn't go how I thought it was going to go.
Right.
It's because some team just comes out early and gets their opponent on their heels and just is able to make some big plays. That's what Notre Dame's going to have to do if they're going to want to win this matchup. So, I mean, I think I give advantage Oklahoma State. The question is, can Notre Dame negate that advantage enough to allow what they're – because I'll put it like this, and I'm going to give a little sneak peek in tomorrow's show. The advantage, the gap between the Notre Dame offense and the Oklahoma State defense, in my opinion, is greater than the gap between the Oklahoma State defense and the Notre Dame offense. And so can Notre Dame narrow that gap to the point where even if you just stalemate, where they make some plays, you make some plays, that to me is going to be enough for Notre Dame to win this game, because Notre Dame does have a really good defense, something Oklahoma doesn't have. And Iowa State's got a nice defense, really good defensive coordinator in John Heacock, but he doesn't have the athletes that Notre Dame's going to be able to throw on the field. And the whole not having Kyle Hamilton thing, Notre Dame hasn't had Kyle Hamilton in 6 games. That's not going to be an issue. Not having Kyron on offense hurts them. Not having Kyle Hamilton on defense doesn't, because they've already learned that. So that's why I say this is an advantage Oklahoma State, but the more narrow Notre Dame's offense can make this matchup be, then it's going to be a Notre Dame win. And if Notre Dame's offense can outplay Oklahoma State, that's how Notre Dame earns a convincing win. And convincing in this game is like 27-13, 24-10, kind of like the Purdue game, right? Where, you win by double digits, but you don't score 40-some points to get there. A convincing win is you score in the 20s, they get barely over 10. That's how you get a convincing win. That's the kind of blowout, that would be more of an actual Notre Dame outplayed them. It's a 27-16, 27-13 game, as opposed to it's 42-14. I don't see that happening unless a lot of crazy stuff goes on. But if that happens, then holy moly, there's going to be some excitement about this Notre Dame football team going into the offseason.
Well, I'm excited to reveal my score prediction, because you and I haven't talked about it yet, and I'm along the same lines, but
got
I'm
a few days
excited
for that.
Yeah, I'm very
got a few days for that.
Where things are going with things, so I'm pumped. I'm excited for that show. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. So, Vince,
no doubt.
That's going to kind of do it for this matchup. Let's go through, if you don't mind, and get a few questions. I think we had a couple super chats during the show. I'm not sure if we pulled those up or not.
One.
Here we go. From John Faulkner.
Yep. John said, thank you so much for the super chat, John. He says, what is the most important position for Notre Dame on each side of the ball for success against Oklahoma State? Well, we just got done talking about the Notre Dame offense versus the Oklahoma State defense, and that's the offensive line.
It's both sides of the ball. It's the same thing on both sides of the ball. It's trenches.
Yes.
You got to win in the trenches. I mean, and John, I'm not saying that in a cliche, you got to win in the trenches. No, I'm saying, like, when you look at these matchups, I believe that Notre Dame has advantages in the skill positions on offense. Right? I think In a 7-on-7 game, Notre Dame, I think, wins this game convincingly. When you start putting the front seven into the mix and the run aspects in the mix, that's where the big advantage is for Oklahoma State. Notre Dame's offensive line has to play good football. They don't have to You're not going to dominate Oklahoma State. I'd be shocked if that happened. I don't see it happening. You have to you got to hold your own, right? It's like what we said about them the whole second half of the year. There weren't any dominating offensive line. There were very few dominating offensive line performances down the stretch. Vince, am I off here?
No,
it was they just did their just get in the way, get a body on a body.
It's all you need to do with a guy like Kyron Williams toting the rock, and obviously he's not carrying the football. But I have a lot of faith in the guys that are carrying the football. So you just have to body on a body, get in the way. I mean, I'm not looking for 5 Quentin Nelsons. Would that be nice? Absolutely, no question about it. But that's not. That's not what we can anticipate from a realistic standpoint. Okay. Get in the way, allow your running backs some lanes to do some work. That's it.
Just let them do what they've been doing. Let them, let them make cuts and let them get to that second level, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So and the same thing on the other side of the ball, John, and we'll dive in more on that tomorrow, but the defensive line's and I have an article about this at irishbreakdown.com where I talk about how the defensive line has an opportunity against what is considered the best, most disruptive defense in the country this year. Notre Dame's defensive line has a chance to say, hey, look, you know what? We're pretty good too.
Yeah, exactly.
And it'll be impactful in the game.
Yeah.
On the other side of the ball, there's some matchups that I think Oklahoma State has a couple nice skill player matchups that they could take advantage of against Notre Dame. The nickel, Clarence Lewis, the safeties, there's some areas where like, boy, if Notre Dame's defensive line can't get pressure, they might be able to rip off a big play or two, which could help them, win a low-scoring, hard-fought game.
Right.
But if the defensive line plays their game, then they'll have those opportunities to be limited, and you can force more mistakes. And we'll dive more into that tomorrow. But since you asked Super Chat, it's literally the lines on both sides of the ball. I mean, and it has to. They have to be right. They have to be on their game. There's no question about it.
Matt has a question here. He was responding to Searcher Green, who said that the Notre Dame offensive line versus their defensive line is the only thing he's worried about. Everything else, he's good. And Matt says, well, hypothetically, what if Harry had been working with these guys since the day Freeman was hired? Would you have more faith then? Just asking the hypothetical question.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, Harry would have gotten a lot more out of a guy like Kane Madden.
Right.
Kane Madden is exactly the kind of style of play that Harry likes. Now, Harry wouldn't have recruited a guy like Caden Madden. He likes longer, athletic. But Caden Madden's a tough kid. And Harry would have taught him how to play with leverage. He would have taught him how to drive his feet. He'd be much better. Jared Patterson would be much better with Harry Heastand. So there's no doubt in my mind that Notre Dame would be a better offensive line with Harry Heastand. But, like you said, it's a hypothetical. And it's not the reality. The reality is Jeff Quinn's the offensive line coach. And I know you know this, Matt. I'm just making the point that they have to figure out a way to win with him. And I'd love to see, because as we've said for years, we both like Jeff Quinn as a human being. He's a nice guy, really nice guy. I'd love to see him go out with a good performance. I would love to see that. And then we can usher in the next era of Notre Dame offensive line play, which hopefully gets them back to being O-line U.
Right.
But, and I'd like to see Coach Heastand go out Coach Quinn go out with a strong performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
Yeah.
Matt D says Peyton Bowen is announcing on January 1st at 11:45 a.m. I'm assuming that is Eastern time.
That is,
yeah. So
we will not have a show that day about that.
Awkward timing.
We will discuss that during the post-game show.
Correct.
So, yes, because I'll be on my way to the game at that point in time.
We both will. Yeah, that's exactly right.
You better be. I can at least get away with showing up right before kickoff because I'm sitting in the stands. But, yeah, you need to get there a little bit early.
That's fair.
But now we'll have written commentary about whatever his decision is on the website. And then I'll have some thoughts on the message board. But we won't have a show. We won't talk. Now, what we'll probably do is when we get back from Arizona – that next week we'll do a show really breaking him down, but we won't have one live most likely because we'll be at the game. So it won't be possible.
Stein, this is funny. That's why I had to put it up. The way things are going, maybe a couple bowl games get COVID canceled and the Irish are the named national champs. LOL.
Yeah. I mean, there you go.
If all 4 teams ahead of them, I guess I'll go out.
I guess. Yeah. It's just whatever.
That's funny. There's a super chat if you want to grab that.
John Faulkner again.
John, thank you very much. He says, just became a premium IB subscriber last week. Just wanted to say thank you both for all of your hard work. I hope Vince finally got to see Die Hard. We started it, did not finish it due to bedtimes and such. So it's on the agenda before I leave for Tempe or wherever.
If you haven't watched Die Hard by the time you leave for Arizona, I'm going to make you reimburse me for all your travel.
10-4. Somehow you know how I'm motivated.
John, thanks for signing up, buddy. I really appreciate it. And I'm working on them, man. I'm working on them. So it's funny, Vince. I was joking with Vince today. I've had a lot of people reach out. So apparently a lot of people watched our Christmas Eve special on the replay. Because I'm even getting emails this morning of people saying, you got to fire Vince. His blasphemy against Die Hard and Christmas Story is a fireable offense. So I have sent all those to Vince. By the way,
it's been them just all. Rapid fire, like screenshots and everything else. So,
while you're looking for the next one, Vince, here's a good one.
From Welling Jeremy says, I think Notre Dame dominates this game. Them boys are ready to show what this team is really capable of, not having Kelly holding them back and calling off the dogs.
I love the energy, and I would love to see that. And anything can happen in a bowl game. But this is a good football team. This is a good football team. They're Notre Dame. If Notre Dame beats Oklahoma State convincingly, it means they played a phenomenal game, because this is a good football team, and this is a team that wants to win this game. I mean, this is a big game for Oklahoma State. Big game for Oklahoma State.
Absolutely.
This isn't a we don't want to be there moment. And something that I talked about, I have an article at Irish Breakdown today up, and I talked about how one of the things about this game for Marcus Freeman is not only is Marcus Freeman coaching in his first game in a New Year's Six Bowl and in a New Year's Six Bowl against a top 10 opponent, but he's facing off against a guy that's a pretty darn good bowl coach. I mean, Mike Gundy this is his 17th season.
Yeah.
This will be his 16th straight year taking them to a bowl game.
Wow.
And he is currently 10-5 in bowl games, and they've won 4 of their last 5. So this is a good bowl game coach. And I'll still contend that one of the best bowl games the last 15, 20 years was that 2011 season. When I say bowl games by the year, I don't mean the day the game is played. I'm talking about the season.
It's the season it's connected to.
So the 2011 Fiesta Bowl between Oklahoma State and that Andrew Luck Stanford team was a phenomenal game. One of the best bowl games in the last 15, 20 years. And his teams are always ready to play. They're always ready to play. And, had a good win over Miami last year. So you have a guy that knows how to get a team ready to win a bowl game and has been, like I said, won 4 of their last 5. So that's another challenge for this game. But if Notre Dame dominates, that would be a tremendous sign. What I don't want to do is put too much, there's a lot at stake here for Notre Dame from a momentum standpoint, things like that. But this isn't going to necessarily – this is still a bowl game. There's still a lot of stuff going on. There's still a lot of, we should learn things from, if they go out and dominate this game, it doesn't mean that Marcus Freeman's going to win 8 national championships.
Right.
If they lose this game, it doesn't mean he's going to be Bob Davie, right? There's a lot of momentum here, but, this is still a bowl game. And Vince, as I've always said to you before, I don't put a lot of stock in bowl games from a practical standpoint, meaning projecting the next season, because there's such weird things, month off and certain kids not playing and all this kind of stuff. But momentum-wise, this would be huge, and it would create a lot of buzz and excitement about next year. And I think we probably are going to learn more about Notre Dame in this bowl game than we do a normal bowl game. I do think that is true. But to win the game impressively it's gonna be a challenge, because, like I said, it's a really good Oklahoma State football team. And Mike Huff said the same thing, Vince. I mean, he's absolutely right. This is a really good football team.
D-Rock wants to know who's going to be the home or the away team in the bowl game.
I believe Notre Dame is the home team.
I would venture to be the accurate, because they're the higher ranked team. So dark jerseys for Notre Dame would be my guess.
Yep. Now, will they be blue or green? I have no idea. I get asked that a lot. But
who knows?
I do imagine we'll see the names on the back, however.
I think that's a
bowl
tradition that's been around for a little while. So
Yep.
I think Charlie Weiss brought that tradition to
He
Notre
brought
Dame.
it back.
He brought it back. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I think it was the Hawaii Bowl. I think it's the first time they did it. Correct? Wasn't it? They
Yes,
didn't do it
it
in
was
the
the Hawaii Bowl. It was
because they didn't do
Hawaii
it
Bowl.
his first two bowl games, the Fiesta and the Sugar. Maybe it was the Hawaii Bowl. They did that because they used to have names on jerseys at Notre Dame.
They did in the regular
yeah.
season, but that was back in
Right.
like this early
Right.
80s, late 70s, right? I think. All right. Not a lot of questions, lots of comments up to this point. Here we go. I think we kind of touched on this, but I'll bring it up again. How much does Oklahoma State blitz? Notre Dame's hot game hasn't been very good.
I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that. I don't think Notre Dame doesn't run hots in the traditional sense. They're not a hot read. They do more checks and things like that. So I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that, Jim. But no, they don't blitz a ton. Oklahoma State doesn't blitz a ton. They rely on just being with their front four. And just for the record, Jack Cohn's stats this year, according to Pro Football Focus, and what we've said about Pro Football Focus is two things. One, ignore their grades and analysis. Like, it's garbage. They had Notre Dame as the 15th best pass blocking team in the country this year based off their grades. It's just a stupid ranking.
Wow.
Right? But where they're really good is data collection.
Right.
They are exceptional at data collection. This is part of data collection. Jack Cohn this year, when blitzed, completed 71.2% of his 124 throws, had 1,056 yards, averaged 9.5 yards per attempt, 9 touchdowns, and 1 interception when blitzed. Notre Dame's blitz passing game this year has been pretty good.
Yeah.
They just, to your point, they don't run a lot of hots, meaning side adjust, things like that. There are things built into their offense that are effective against the blitz that allow Jack Cohn to get the ball out quickly. But that's one thing I would push back on just a little bit when it comes to how effective they are when being blitzed.
Alan has a good one here. How many times have you seen when you go against a good rush team is having your offense run at their strength? Is there a possibility of that here against Oklahoma State?
It's not something I advise very often. And if it is, it's kind of a change up. Like, hey, we're going to do something early to kind of – the only way you do that is if you've got some dudes on the other side. Like if another team's a great run defense – and you've got Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey and Alex Bars and Sam Mustipher and Tommy Kramer and Robert Hainsey as your offensive line, then you don't care what they're good at. I mean, your strength is run defense, but you don't have our dudes. And we saw Notre Dame do that in 2017. This is not a game I would do that. I'm not running just right at them. Now, that doesn't mean Notre Dame can't have some success, but it's going to require you to play at a high level, and it's not something you're going to do all the time. But what you also can't do, Alan, and this is the thing too, is you can't just avoid something because they're good at it, because then you're not making them have to defend you in that. You have to still be willing to attack them in those regards.
David says he's an Irish fan from Boise, Idaho. He says, I was at the Boise State game. They should have lost to Boise. Horrible call by the refs on the turnover fumble that should have been a touchdown.
There's a couple opportunities that Boise had to win that game. It was a 1-point game. And this year was not a great Boise State team either.
Right.
What Boise go, like 8-4 this year? 7-4, 8-5, something like that. This was not a typical Boise State football team. 7-5. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, they lost to Nevada by 10, Air Force, San Diego State by 11, UCF by 5. Their closest loss this year was to Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's had a lot of really close wins this year, but a big part of that is because their offense is right, and their defense is really good.
Michael Johnson with a question: can Oklahoma State offense score enough points to keep pace if we score 31?
I'd be shocked if that happened. So.
No.
Shocked.
If Notre Dame can get
Shocked.
in the 30s, I'm giving a lot of credit to Notre Dame winning this game.
Yeah,
Like,
I shocked, Michael. I'd be shocked.
Yeah, me
It'd
too.
be very surprising. Notre Dame's defense will just have to not show up for that to happen, and I just shocked. I mean, that'd be shocked. I'd be really, really surprised. Really, really surprised.
Mark says he can't find Oklahoma State on YouTube, football website, anything. It's like they don't have any football media, nothing current anyway. Has anyone been able to find them?
It's still a lot of print. I mean, they're one of the teams that still gets covered a lot by newspapers, to be honest with you.
Huh.
I remember one day I went to their rivals site, and I think they hadn't written an article in like 3 days. It's like last week. And it's like, what the heck? So it's not a big fan base, and it's the number 2 fan base in a small state. I mean, because Oklahoma's number 1. So, but no, they're mostly media. What you can do is, Jim, I actually was able to find all the Coach Gundy's interviews are online, and let me see if I can find the link to that. So Vince, if you can go to the next question while I'm trying to find that thing, I'll put it in the description, or I'll put it in the chat below about that.
Ed says, what's going on with Notre Dame in practice? Have they avoided injuries? How are they doing? Well, they haven't practiced since, I want to say, Wednesday. Does that sound right?
They've all been home since, I think,
right.
Since basically from
Maybe
Thursday on, they haven't been able to practice.
There you go. Wednesday was their last practice, I do believe.
They're all flying to Arizona today, and they will
Correct.
practice today, and Coach Freeman will be there tonight. Have they avoided injuries? I'll comment more on that later. I'm not going to comment on that right now. We'll have more on that later tonight as we get some
intel. Some more intel.
So there's a YouTube channel that I put in. That's Oklahoman. I believe that's a local newspaper or a newspaper in the state. They have a lot of the videos, like the Mike Gundy and player videos. So if you want to watch some of those, like the most recent one they did, that's the best that I could find. But a lot of their games are online. But yeah, they don't have a ton of great coverage, which is kind of sad because it's a really good football program. It really is.
There's a super chat down there if you want to grab it real quick.
Yep.
From Chris F. From Canada. He says, happy holiday, boys. 30 negative net. Oh, I didn't see the negative there at first. Negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit here in Edmonton, Alberta. Holy, I hope that's wind chill and not just straight up degrees, but holy crap, dude. I'm sorry. Hopefully you're staying inside and staying warm under like 17 blankets.
Yeah. Good Lord.
I was about to complain that, it's not going to be great weather down in Arizona, but I'm not going to complain to you, Chris, because that's just mean. I would never do that.
Good Lord.
Wow. Holy cow.
Yeah, that didn't sound like fun at all.
Jim's got a super chat down there at the bottom. Thank you, Jim, very much. He says, have a drink on me in Tempe. I wonder if he tried to rhyme that. I'm not sure. But thank you, Jim. Really appreciate that. We are looking to have a good time. And looks like it's going to rain a lot, which...
Yeah, Vince is all bummed. He was going to go play some golf, but it's going to be in the 40s and 50s all week.
Not really. I mean, 50s is like a heat wave compared to what we normally have up here. But I can deal with that. It's the precipitation from the sky that might put a hindrance on some things, but that's okay. So Nick says, does Oklahoma State traditionally travel well? Curious what the crowd spread is going to be. Keep us updated on what you see in Arizona, Vince.
Yeah, I'll be in Arizona too, man. Come on, Nick. I mean, I'm a little hurt here, man. No.
You're going to be there longer than me because you're leaving a day earlier. And
but I'm going as a fan.
Later.
I'm not going. Yeah. I'm not going to cover the team. I'm going there as a fan. Now I'll do work there, and we'll have at least one podcast from down there. But I got to talk to Vince about all that. But yeah, we'll definitely do. I wanted to say too, I am still working on trying to find a place for Friday.
Oh, okay.
So we are going to try to meet up around like 1:30ish, so that way we can watch the first game and then just kind of hang out and not catch the New Year's Eve crowd that'll show up later. But
I'm just not part of the New Year's Eve crowd. I never have been. I don't think I ever will.
The only time I've ever been out on a New Year's was like once in college, and I was like, this is so dumb. I just want to be home right now, relaxing, getting ready for games tomorrow. Because that was always what New Year's was for me, is all the games that were going to be on the next day. It's like starting 11 a.m. all day, nothing but football. It was like Christmas It's like a late Christmas present for me. But keep follow me on Twitter, and then I'll put some on the message board, and we'll talk about some later shows once we finalize where we're going to be. But if you're going to be in Phoenix on Friday, definitely be prepared like around 1:30 that Phoenix time to meet up somewhere to have some food, hang out, talk some ball, be a good time. I'm really looking forward to it.
Me too. No doubt about that. And for New Year's, for me, the only time I've ever been out on New Year's is when I was working and waiting on people. So that was always fun. Glad I don't have to do that anymore. Let's just put it that way. And I have a 6 a.m. radio show to do local time. So I will not be staying up till midnight. I can promise you that. I will be getting up early.
JP asked one question. Is Fisher back for the game? We've talked about that before. He has practiced. He's been practicing with the team. We expect him to play. Yes. We'll have more on how much later tonight. So just stay locked into the Irish Breakdown, the message board, and I'll put something up later, and then we'll have something about kind of what's going on there. So yes, we do expect him to play in the game.
Sure. Let's see here. Brandon. Oh,
sorry.
That's okay. Time. Oh, you picked the same one? All right. Brandon says, now with G transferring, I'm hoping Notre Dame takes a 6-man DB class in 23. They're in the mix with too many elite guys not to capitalize by taking as many as possible.
Well, I don't think
6 is high.
I mean, I'm fine if it's 6, if it's the right 6. I don't think you focus on Brandon. It can't be about numbers, and I'm not necessarily saying you're saying that, but you can't focus on taking 6 if it's not the right guys. Because what happens is you take 6 guys and 2 or 3 of them aren't high-level players, and then that's less guys you can take in 2024. So 5 has got to be the number. They need 2 corners, 2 safeties, and then 1 you can either have a hybrid guy or a third safety, third corner. But if you can get 6, it's got to be the right 6. I mean, if you got Christian Gray and Justin Rett committed at corner, Peyton Bowen and Adon Schuler at safety, and you can get Malik Muhammad and Caleb Downs, heck yeah, you take 6. It's got to be the right guys. So, and Vince, I think that is going to do it for today's show. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same bat channel, 1 p.m. And then Wednesday, I'll be traveling. So we're not quite sure what our schedule is going to be. We're still trying to work that out. I'll be traveling Wednesday. Vince will be traveling on Thursday. And then we've got to figure out just really what it's going to look like. But we'll definitely have shows every day. It's just we may have to pre-record some shows just in case our connections down there aren't good and we can't do live shows. So we'll be prepared with shows, whether or not they'll be live or not. We'll let y'all know. So just stay locked in. But that's why you got to hit the notification bell. That's why you need to hit the subscribe button. And because you like the show, please hit the like button as well. So I appreciate y'all being with us today.
Yeah,
I'm looking forward to being down there. I'm hoping I get a chance to meet a lot of you guys on Friday. We'll see how that goes. And Mike Huff, thank you for the super chat, man. Like I said,
he's just
stay tuned into later, man. All right, we'll get down all that later. All right, and we never said anything about anybody hitting a pine. You're allowed to rotate guys as well, so just stay locked into the show tonight. All right. So anyway, everybody, appreciate everything. Vince, thanks for the show, and we will talk to you guys again tomorrow. Have a good one.